Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Can I invite the rest of the panelists to please join me on stage?
So who's first? Yeah. Can I? Yeah.
Good morning. So we are going to be talking about inclusivity in the workplace. And this panel is hosted by Zain and is brought to you by C5's Nebula, which is our Women in Tech initiative. And with me this morning is Wafe Obaidate, founder and CEO of Obai and Hill, Fatima Haider, ambassador for diversity for Zain Group, and Leena Alolaimy, founder and managing partner of Diversity on Board, and last but not least, Tala Fakhro, executive director for market and strategy intelligence. So we are going to be talking about why inclusivity is important and what can really be done to make workplaces more balanced and more progressive. So I'll start with you, Fatima. In 2017, Zain launched their Women's Empowerment Network. And the idea was really to help women drive change, but also be part of it. And it was refreshing to see that the initiative was actually launched by the Vice Chairman and Group CEO, Obaidate. And he noted that championing gender diversity at Zain will create competitive differentiation and ultimately improve the company's bottom line. So this is not just about gender diversity, this is actually about better business. So can you tell us a little bit about what you think is the most effective way to really make this case?
I think it starts with, first, hello everyone. I think it starts with having a group of believers in driving a change at the start. And then looking into systems and processes and putting a plan that would make this happen, like implementing and executing the right action plans to take it forward. As a strategy, we have two parts. The first one is we're looking into having a women leadership representation in the company. By 2020, we're aiming to have 25% achieved. And the other part is going through such direction through the three stages of evolution, which is awareness, realization, and then motivation.
So that's great, because from a strategic perspective, it's clear that there's a lot of work that needs to be done from a top-down level to make sure that we have specific KPIs. But Leena, perhaps I'll come to you. Even with all the efforts, still the numbers globally are pretty low. So whether it's how much money is put into investing in female founders or VCs, or how many women are in senior positions. So again, studies do show that organizations become much more productive and much more profitable when they're more diverse. And this is not just gender, this is inclusivity and diversity in general. You've done a lot of work and research in this space. Tell us, why is diversity critical for better businesses?
Yeah, so I'm really glad that you brought up that diversity is more than just gender. It's obviously cultural, it's educational diversity, different abilities. And you know, if you are adopting a human-centered or user-centric approach, whether you're a business that's serving customers or whether you are a government that's serving its citizens, it helps to actually have those customers or those citizens represented in your workplace, on your boards, because they can understand the actual needs, the interests, design products and services that really help to enhance your life, whether it's a government service or a product. And there's a lot of really great examples, but one that I love from the social sector is how they were looking at building a school in India in this rural area so that girls could go to school. And so they spent all this money, they built this school, and the girls were not going to school. And so they were wondering why, and this is all men, by the way, who built it. And so they were wondering, why are the girls not going to school? And then they realized it's because they can't afford sanitary napkins every month when they're menstruating. So they wouldn't have thought of that as men, but this is just one example of how important it is to actually have people at the table. Aside from the fact that numerous studies show the business benefits, higher shareholder returns, better risk management, and all of those things that I think we're all aware of.
I mean, you highlight that there's a lot of untapped potential if you don't have everyone at the table, so to speak, but also that there might be pain points and problems that you're not seeing. And blind spots that you're not aware of. But I want to segue and ask Tala specifically. You sit on the board of the Bahrain Development Bank, but also the benefit company. Internationally, the numbers when it comes to corporate boards are very, very low when it comes to women's representation. I think it's about 12% globally, and if you look at Fortune 500, it's maybe 15%, and these numbers are barely growing. So can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the challenges getting appointed to boards, but also once you're on that board, what are some of the challenges, and what can we do to address them?
So I think that very often we tend to go with the networks that we know, which is why boards have historically been more male than female. So we need to have a way, since the network doesn't happen automatically, we need to have a way to understand who are the qualified women who could potentially gain access to these boards. And once that information is collated in one place, it's easier to say, okay, fine, there's a database here. Let me select this person because it seems like she has the right qualifications to add value to my board. This is the first point, and I think Leena has done some good work around that with diversity on board and other initiatives. But once you're on the board, let's say you get on this board, you face a lot of challenges. First of all, there's a lot of previous knowledge or previous relationships that you have to navigate around if you're a woman. Sometimes you're coming into the room, you are the only woman in the room. And I think that that can be a little bit off-putting for some people. Sometimes you're the only voice of dissent as well. But the thing to remember, and I think the thing that we have to keep reinforcing is that if you don't have diverse people on panels, if you don't have diverse people on boards, you will always hear what you want to hear. It's like the echo chamber reinforces itself. If you're a Fox News watcher, you will only ever hear a pro-Trump message. It's the same on a board which is all the same kind of man who went to the same kind of school, had the same kind of background. And I think you need to shake that up a bit. Otherwise, you'll make mistakes, as Leena was saying. So I think that's...
So I think you bring up a good point that, and Wafa, I'll come to you for this point, that diversity and the lack thereof is often also a factor of, society, it's a factor of cultural assimilation, it's a factor of, as I mentioned earlier, some, blind spots that we have and inherent biases. And in our region, sometimes they can be even more pronounced than other regions. Wafa, can you tell us a little bit about how you account for these realities in your businesses, and what are some of the things you have done to break barriers and make your businesses not just more inclusive, but also more empowering to women?
So,
Here, take this one. I think this is working now.
So, I mean, as a company owner, I think we're predominantly known as a woman-based firm and company, and I'm really proud of that. I think what we try to do internally is we empower women, we put them at the forefront of our work, we give them leadership opportunities, we allow them the space to fail and to try and to make mistakes. And as a collective approach, our agency also launched the Women Power Summit, which I'm really, really proud of. This was the largest congregation of women leaders in one place in MENA. 1,200 women attended. What that told me is there's definitely a gap, and there was a huge space that we needed to fill in terms of getting women to come together, to network, to grow, to get access to mentors, as Tala was saying. The whole language was based around shared experience, so women were very transparent, and they talked about failures. 35% of our attendees, of our 1,200 attendees, were able to find mentors and have access to mentors. 25% of them benefited from the networking. So through the summit and through our initiatives, and I'm really, really proud to be on this stage as well with Leena, because we were able to collaborate on diversity on boards, which she's spearheading, which is an incredible platform, as well as Nebula. And I think these are the platforms that I felt are trying to fill in these gaps in the market.
So let's stay on that point, because I was going to come to that point and talk about initiatives and where doing good and social initiatives are important. So let's stay on that point, but let's actually park that point. I want to ask specifically organizationally. So Zain, as an organization, what can organizations do when accounting for hiring, when accounting for internal practices to make sure that they deal with these biases? And then, Fafa, I'll come back to you because I want to talk actually about your businesses before I segue into diversity on board, Nebula, and Women Power Summit. I want to talk about, if you are a senior executive in a business, man or woman alike, what are some of the things you need to account for when you're hiring, when you're structuring your businesses, and when you're setting strategies for greater inclusivity? So, Fatima, perhaps, and Zain?
I believe it starts with having equal opportunities at a start, and then we establish it based on awareness. The first thing to, let's say, prevent unconscious biases or implicit bias, if we can call it that, is to be aware of what you're doing next. I mean, throughout last year, Zain Bahrain, being an industry that it's, let's say, male dominant, it's too technical. This is what the stereotype is all about. We always took for granted the idea of maybe such technical jobs are more male dominant, but when it came to selection, it took more time, but with that awareness that we had, we made sure that our HR department, since I'm from HR, to have a clear understanding when it comes to selection. So we tried our best to have a balanced ratio when it comes to screening and selection as well. Before we never saw those figures, in fact, from a female or from a gender perspective. But now we speak that language. Like when we address or let's say talk about selection, we speak about that we had a number like X percentage of males selected and X percentage of females selected, and we might go back to the process in case we've seen that the ratio is not balanced. We would look at that. So yeah. It's all about awareness and having the right conversation. And throughout, I mean, addressing such figures, in fact, we would mention it now. It's part of the system.
And I think that's an important point, is that while having conversations about women's empowerment, it's important to actually sit down and look at the numbers. I mean, that's not to say, and we were having a conversation earlier in the room as we were preparing, that's not to say that women should be put in positions to fill quotas or to make this more of a fad than a business decision. But actually, it is important to sit down and to look at the numbers and to come up with a process. So, Leena, perhaps, as Wafa mentioned, you know, Wafa last year launched the Women Power Summit. We launched Nebula, which is a platform that hopes to engage women to break into the tech space, but also to excel in it. And it's refreshing to see a lot of women in the audience, but technology and banking and other sectors remain sectors where there is still an underrepresentation of women. So Leena, you founded Diversity on Board, and perhaps it's more focused on corporate boards, but tell us a little bit about what are some of the measures that can be taken to make sure that, again, when we're being more inclusive, we're doing it in a way that serves business and serves the wider agenda of enablement.
So quotas come up a lot, and I kind of flip-flop on this issue. Sometimes I think quotas are a terrible idea. Other times I think actually in some contexts it's needed. So there's a great illustration that shows the difference between equity and equality. And so when you have equality, it's like giving two people a box to stand on so they can see over a wall. But one of the guys is 6 foot and the other is like 5 foot. So that's equality. You've given them the same thing, but they're starting from two different places. Yeah. So with quotas, you know, again, I'm not sure. I don't want to be so quick to dismiss it. But I think the other things that can be done are, you know, like Fatima said in Zain, it's widening your pool of applicants. So it's saying, okay, it's not that we necessarily will hire people who aren't qualified, but we will at least ensure that we see an equal number of qualified men and women. Another thing that some organizations do is actually completely blind hiring or recruiting. I've seen that happen with innovation grants as well, where they will go through an application process and not know until the final stage what that applicant's gender is, what their nationality is, because that can also play a role. You know, both positive discrimination and negative discrimination. So I think those kind of measures are really important. And then the other thing that I think comes up, which Tala touched on, is, you know, these networks that you know who you know within your own network, and I don't think it's intentional. But one reason that we started Diversity on Board is because a lot of men would say, well, we would hire more women, or we would put more women on the panel, we just don't know any. And, you know, and you think, how could you not know any? But people only know who they know within their own networks. So what we're trying to do with Diversity on Board is at least provide this talent pool that makes it very easy for people to identify And then, each candidate is judged on their own merit, but at least we can kind of help in providing that source.
On the back of that, before I come to Tala, is there, however, a role, because we have conversations about this before, that you do know who you know, and there are circles, people run, that's a natural tendency. I will pick the people I know and the people I see most. So is there also a role for women to stand up and put their hand up and say, by the way, you guys are, I heard, looking for board members for this amazing company. Guess what? I'm pretty experienced and have this experience. Because men have a tendency to make themselves known, to get, and again, there are going to be more limited opportunities because of majlises and because of other realities, right? But is there an opportunity to say, actually, hi, and this is my expertise. Wafa, you stood up yesterday and asked the minister a question. You don't shy away from opportunities. Is there a role? Do you want to tell women in the audience a little bit about, put your hand up, step up, and...
So I think just reflecting back on the summit's experience, I think growing up, I realized a lot of my mentors were men. It was very challenging for me to find female mentors who were in business, who were also open to having these discussions with me. It is a very male-dominant area. The whole idea was, when you look around, and in my line of work, a lot of the decision-making is done by men. A lot of the board members are the spots are taken up by men. And, we need to also do our part to be present and to be there as well, and find those opportunities. And I think what the summit did is it gave women access, not just to board members, but access to mentors, where you could, have these discussions with them all in that one space. And the largest theme in the whole summit has been, how do you navigate obstacles? How do you increase your confidence? How do you take more risk? We didn't have that intentionally, but it kind of weaved through all the sessions. So there is definitely a lot of work that we have to do from our side, but I think when you sit in a room full of women that are talking openly about their failures, their struggles, or when they put their hand up and they fail, or no one kind of listens to them, or what did they do to kind of overcome that, that's when you get inspired to want to reach or to push a little bit harder or lean in.
And there's this concept of leaning in, but also of amplifying. We were at a workshop a few months ago with Teresa Carlson, a VP for Amazon Web Services, public sector, and she was talking about this concept of amplifying, wherein I think it was the Obama administration, there were a lot of women in senior positions, and they often realized that they wouldn't be invited to some of the meetings, or that decisions were being made by the men and they were not included. So they decided to come together and support each other and amplify each other's efforts and go together. So there is a role for women to play to amplify each other's efforts and to hold each other's, not to sound like cheesy about it, but to say, let's do this together, because you need that kind of role model and ally, but you also need the partnership of men and their alliances. And this can't be a conversation that only happens with women without the men. So Tala, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how men have played a role in shaping your career and the importance of that partnership.
So I was a banker for 15 years, and it's a very male-dominated society. And not only was I a banker, I was a trader. So that tells you the kind of atmosphere I was in. Having said that, male allies were my mentors, because there were no women in those roles, or very few women in those roles. And the women that were in those roles were so busy trying to catch up to be like the men that they didn't take the time to help me navigate myself. So the people who helped me were actually men. And I think it's crucial to remember that this is not a zero-sum game. Women's gains are not men's losses, and we need to make that message clear. This is good for everybody. This is a win-win situation. This is a win for the company. This is a win for the employee. This is a win for the board, if we have everyone in the room. If you are excluding 50% of your population, you are doing yourself a disservice. And it's not more altruistic than that. It's just common sense. And I think we have to always keep that in mind. We have to beware of being exclusionary, of being, I agree with the amplification that you mentioned. I agree that women need to stick together, and women need to do a better job mentoring each other. Women need to help each other in the same way that men help each other. But we need to do it not to the exclusion of men, but to the inclusion of all, of every race, of every gender, of every culture, because that helps everybody.
If I can just jump in as well, we had a session in the summit called "Do Women Really Support Women in the Workplace?" And studies have actually shown that women don't want a female boss, but men don't also want a female boss. So how are we meant to get more women into influential roles if they're not getting that support. So it is a little bit cheesy, but do we actually tear each other down and get jealous and get frustrated, or are we supporting each other, happy when the other one, gets that promotion and you don't, and having that support or that mentor, you'll be that next person who will get that role. So there is a huge culture change or a shift that we need to also do from our end, which is how do we have each other's backs? And the story about the Obama administration is an excellent one because they would actually have an agenda and walk in and have each other's back and support each other to get their points across.
Yeah. Leena, you're laughing. I feel like you want to add to this.
No, I love what Tala just said. No, I'm not laughing.
Anything on the amplification or on greater inclusivity?
I mean, on amplification, I think I do see actually a lot of women. So one thing is a lot of women who have made it to the leadership positions, it's common that they say, actually, I was supported by men because there weren't a lot of women. I was moderating a panel a few months ago for a global management consultancy. And it was the same thing with the female partners. They were saying, when I had a baby and moved to Australia and had to, relocate because of my husband, the partners at the firm, the male partners at the firm actually helped me manage my clients, and they helped me manage the hours, and I wouldn't have, made it had it not been for the men. At the same time, I am seeing this cultural shift, and I am seeing a lot more women, and if social media is a barometer, I see a lot of women on my social media that are kind of amplifying other women and saying, I'm so proud of so-and-so for doing, XYZ, for winning an award, for launching this. And that's really great to see because we don't, I didn't used to see that 5 years ago, where we celebrate each other's successes and actually amplify and are genuinely proud and happy to share.
Just to be slightly controversial, is there a risk that we're lowering the bar? Is there a risk that if we're celebrating everything and sometimes we're celebrating empowerment a bit too much, is that we're lowering the bar and we're not, encouraging women to compete with each other and with the men to make sure that when they do get that seat, they can actually, because I always say, look, don't give me a seat at the table because I'm a woman. Give me a seat because I'm the best person. And if I do well, take me to the bigger table, and then take me to the bigger table, and then the biggest table. Don't not take me to the biggest table if I genuinely got there by merit. So is there a risk, and I'm just throwing this out there, there's no right or wrong answer, is there a risk that we're lowering the bar and making it easy to celebrate achievements when we're celebrating mediocrity?
I think to some extent there is that perception that there might be this dumbing down, if you will, of things. But I want to throw something else out, which is that the culture has changed. If you look at the way that Gen X is versus the millennials, Gen X is all about competition, right? So you're always going to beat the next person. I think this generation, and maybe it's a reaction to the technical revolution, but we're really seeing a lot more value being placed on collaboration and teamwork than has been the case in the past. And in a team, you can't be a superstar. If you have a team full of superstars, you don't have something that works. So I think that the culture is shifting as well.
That's good. I'm conscious of time. We have 1 minute, so I'm going to give you each 20 seconds to give one inspirational piece on how to become a good advocate as a woman.
I think we all have a responsibility to open up our lives and be transparent and talk about our failures and the challenges. Too many people, hide behind this facade of, everything looks great, and not just that, but they're quite private. So I think let's reinforce knowledge sharing by women for women.
Thank you. Fatima?
And just to elaborate on what my sister just said, I think it's all about partnership rather than working. I think we need to work together rather than working against each other. It's not men versus women. It's basically a partnership where if we work together, like preventing gender on one, putting it just on one side, it would make a difference in the business.
Leena?
Yeah, I agree. I think, to advance women's, and I don't like to use the word women's empowerment because I think actually women are pretty empowered. It's the environment that's a little bit broken. But I think that you need to be inclusive in an all-encompassing way. So if you're going to be inclusive, it's not just women, it's men as well. Google recently
Thank you.
just
I'm going to
had
have to jump, sorry, because I can see this huge thing glaring saying time's up, so the risk of getting kicked off stage, Tala.
I would say never stop learning and never stop trying. That would be my word of advice.
Thank you, Tala, Leena, Fatima, and Wafa, and thank you all. Thank you to Zain for being so forward-thinking as an organization, and to Unbound for their organization, and obviously to C5 Nebula as well for putting this together. Thank you all.